The next panel that we have is preparing the force for 21st century logistics. And if you're a logistician in the Marine Corps or any of the branches, if you've ever talked to a logo, shoot, if you even had a package delivered by Amazon, then you know the name Colonel Angel. Well known for his logistics prowess, he is synonymous with the word, and a personal and professional influence in my own life. Colonel Angel is the director of the Combat Elements Division at the Marine Corps Combat Development and Integration Branch. With a career spanning over several units, levels of commands, he specialized in logistics and planning across the board. He has served as the executive assistant to the Deputy Commandant of Installations and Logistics, commanding officer of the Marine Corps Logistics Operations Group, and in various other logistics roles. He holds a master's degree from the Naval War College, and if there's anything that you need to know about logistics or any type of connection, he is the Kevin Bacon of logistics. Give him a round of applause.
Yeah, so it's always tough to follow something like that. Thanks to the Association for Marine Corps Logisticians. Thanks for you all coming. So I'm one of the few folks that did raise their hand saying, okay, for the past few years, particularly while we've been coming to CNU, who has been here for each one of them? So about 2 years ago, for what it's worth, there weren't too many uniforms even in the crowd. Now, part of it, I think we actually did allow some folks to wear civilian clothes, even if you were in the military. So last year we started to see a few more, and then this year it's pretty phenomenal to see at least 50% of folks wearing the uniform of all different ranks, and then from different services as well as allies and partners then too. So my hat is off to you and your organizations for the investment of time to come here this week then too. So yeah, I'm super honored and humbled to be sitting at the table, and I'm going to do some introductions here in just a second. But this particular topic is one that's real close to me, and part of it is because as there's a few of you who are students of mine when I was back as a faculty advisor at Expeditionary Warfare School, and then I was able to carry that on at the Marine Corps Logistics Operations Group, really pushing training, particularly for units as well as organizations and units. And why I bring that up is just for background, so it's not just that I stayed at the Holiday Inn Express last night, which is actually true, but I do have an affinity and a love and a kind of a closeness, particularly to how do we build not just logisticians, but other professionals to understand logistics as well. So, and what do I mean by that? So really the question here is, it's about developing critical thinkers, not necessarily just about logistics, but developing critical thinkers who, first of all, know what the word logistics is, then who can go into an environment and start thinking, I'll bet people are probably going to need this, this, and this. Then they can also think, okay, what are the options that are available? Then they can think, how can I actually reach into those options? And then potentially even start asking other folks from other organizations, what might you need? Because it is all about kind of an integrated pathway there. So that's what the intent of this is. Many of you already know the challenges that exist within logistics. And I could list a few of those just to kind of spark a thought then, whether that's the challenge of how am I going to move mass casualties from one location to another over long distances? Do I have the right people in the right place to even do casualty care? How do I know what parts are going to be needed so that I can be responsive? What types of maintenance do I want to put in certain locations? What transportation means is the right means? And, when we start thinking about all domain transportation and mobility options. So you all know that those are the challenges. What I'm excited about is I, as well as you, are looking forward to kind of tapping into some of the resources to my left to ask them, okay, from the wargaming perspective, from the model and simulation perspective, from the data perspective, pulling that all together, how can we use those tools to build that understanding, to create and develop those logisticians? So super happy to have three folks to my left and to your right. So the first one you heard from earlier, although I was going to say, okay, you can still wear your hat because then people don't know that it was you earlier. So, but he sat up here earlier with Mr. Travis Reese, kind of talking specifically about war games. So Kurt Hudson has 30 years of time in the Army, particularly from the cavalry side of the house, and then moving on then into wargaming. And I, at one point I said wargaming. I'm like, yeah, I don't think he's the wargamer, as in the one who's just playing it all the time, but from the war game specialist side of the house. And there's many different types of war games that we'll talk about as well. So one step over is Lieutenant Colonel Matt Morse. He's here representing TECOM, talking about Project Tripoli. And what is Project Tripoli? What does it mean to the Marine Corps? And particularly, how can we leverage that from the viewpoint of logistics? So another neat opportunity that I'd like to pull on then too is Matt also spent time as a modeling and simulation officer within the Marine Corps Logistics Operations Group. So he was able to carry some of the things that he even learned from there. We were just joking, they actually still use some of those systems that he had developed while there as a modeling and simulation officer from MPS. The other thing that's fascinating about Matt, as well as Pedro to his further left, so why I am humbled is, so Matt has a PhD in modeling and simulation from MPS, and then to his left, so Lieutenant Colonel Pedro Ortiz, also I wouldn't say a wearer of PhD because we don't really have that as a rank, but PhD in computer science. Pedro's coming down and joining us while wearing a Marine uniform and certainly representing the Marine Corps. So he's coming from OSD's office for CDAO. So both from the data and artificial intelligence side of the house. So why I just wanted to spend a little bit of time on, this is not the panel to talk about all the challenges of logistics, because many of you know them. This is actually the panel for us to really leverage the experience of folks to my left of, okay, how can we use wargaming, model and simulation, as well as data and artificial intelligence to really raise the bar for our folks within the logistics community and for those who are not in the logistics community to better understand logistics. So since he's the one that's closest to me, Kurt, I'm gonna start off with you. And I know earlier you even had talked quite a bit with Travis, and one of the things Travis and I were talking about is, we talked about that war game this morning, but one of the things, just to help walk the dog, of how could I use a war game like that to actually help develop future logisticians? So over to you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming back. DoD says there's 3 ways to use war games, models, and sims. The first one is educational. I'm focused on the people in the room to teach them, train them, educate them on a particular set of tasks, particular set of responsibilities. I'm looking at it from an educational perspective. MCU at Quantico is a good example of using wargaming in the PME environment to do just that. War games are permeating a lot of courses throughout the Corps at echelon, and will probably increase in the depth and breadth of that over the next couple of years. And that type of game is focused on the people using the tool, the player. Educational. The second type is experiential. It's to gain experience at a task or in a role or both based on your current position. I've seen division and corps level staffs use board or digital war games or simulations outside of their normal exercise schedules to train their staffs on their battle tasks. Experiential is still oriented on the people in the room. 2 of the 3 oriented on people. The third one you really see at higher echelons, analytical wargaming, the focus moves from the people to the data, and the data can be quantifiable or qualifiable, right? What do I mean by qualifiable data? Think about how you develop a concept. You start with a broad series of ideas, and over time through your experimentation and eventually your testing, you gel those ideas into an operational concept like multi-domain operations, EABO. And eventually, as you move further to the right in your modernization and acquisition timeline, you begin to focus on those quantifiable things to help inform those solutions that you still lack to feed the concept. So 3 basic types of war games, 3 audiences, 2 of them overlap. And I'm saying games, but the gentleman to the right will quickly remind you that models and simulations are part of what I call like the holy triumvirate of learning things, right? At some point, a game may be an appropriate tool, especially in a classroom without a lot of tech support and additional resources. A game can help me in that environment for education. Models, as we talked this morning, can inform the how much, how far, how fast, some of those really wicked problems you see in some of the theaters we experiment in. And then simulations is kind of that molding of the two, because it can give you a lot of data, but if you design that experiment where you're using a staff and a red team, and you've got those roles, you can still get into the human decision-making and the why did I do a thing, which, while oriented on people, can inform those ideas and potentially help you understand why a particular innovation, whether it be technology or a different way to do a task, can be of benefit to a military organization. So to get to the question, games, models, sims can all work together to make your organization or help your organization solve a military problem.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah. Matt, you want to build right on that to kind of talk about, how do you relate mods and sims? We'll come to kind of Project Tripoli stuff in a little bit, but the mods and sims related to wargaming.
Absolutely, sir. So model and simulation, we've got the different pillars as we refer to them in the M&S community. You have experimentation, wargaming, you have training, you have acquisition, you have analysis. And one of the things, we have modeling simulations officers all across all of those pillars. McWill, we're really beefing them up. We're adding another couple, bringing them up to 3, in addition to Lieutenant Colonel Scotty Black coming out soon this summer. So they'll have 4 M&S professionals there at McWill to support the Neller Center. But the majority of our M&S officers are across the training and education domain. What we need to get better at is building upon all of the different focuses across those different pillars. Many in the wargaming world are familiar with Peter Perla, the cycle of research. We need to make that a cycle of research and training, because there's as much value that needs to be brought into the training and education domain as we can give back to the wargaming domain. And what I mean by that is McWill has a couple of different arms that are doing M&S work, modeling simulations work. They have their experimentation team. Mr. Ryan Reeder there is a good crack team that's using simulations for experiments. That's separate from wargaming division. So they're looking specifically at particular capabilities, concepts, answering particular questions using sims like AFSIM and GTS. And then you have wargaming as well, which should be benefiting from some of the experimentation work and is also itself feeding over into the analysis work of Operations Analysis Directorate. So there are 3 different organizations there that are looking at all these concepts, all these capabilities, doing some rigorous analysis. Over at Training and Education Command, we need that information now more than ever to inform our design and development of training capabilities. Because in the past, we could go out to operations officers and chiefs and ask them, what do you need to train for how you do your job? We can't do that now to the extent we have, because we have a whole slew of new capabilities and concepts we're looking to implement in a whole new way. And so that needs to be informed by both sides. And going back to Pierre Perla's original way of his circle works of, training and education, you have those live experiments. We should be feeding that back into experimentation and wargaming, because there's a lot of good data you can get from actually observing Marines in the field. Well, that is something that we're also working on getting after, so that we're actually capturing that live force data, force on force instrumentation of Marines in the field. And that's one way we can get after something that is a big problem across those pillars, which is, what are your authoritative data sources? I should say authoritative in quotes, because it's authoritative relative to the purpose and relative to what attributes were actually collected or addressed in that data. But we're all struggling with that across the M&S pillars, but we can all help each other out.
Yeah, it's almost like this was scripted. So yeah, Pedro, from the perspective of data, which data means a lot of different things, because in some cases that data isn't necessarily data in a system. It's just collections about what people are doing. So yeah, what are your thoughts on what data can we use, and how do we use that to tie to those mods and sims?
Yes, sir. So I was listening to my other panelists here. We heard the term authoritative data. So that's always good to have if you can find it, right? We heard the previous panel talk about how many systems across the Marine Corps where we get data from, and maybe if we got rid of most of them, we'd be better off, right? So I think, I heard what I heard from one of the other panelists in the previous panel was like, work with the data you have, right? Because you're never going to have the data that you want. Right, and I would start there, right, and ask myself, like, what does the data tell me? And use the tools that you have available to you, right? So, like, maybe it's just an Excel spreadsheet, right? And then, the next step for me would be, how do I visualize that data to maybe gain some more insight? And maybe that's, maybe it's just a simple chart inside of an Excel spreadsheet, and that's my starting point. Maybe I'm lucky enough to have a former NPS grad or an NPS grad that is stationed at my command that knows how to program or use some of these low-code or no-code tools, and like they could build me something, right? That would be, but the idea is to try to iteratively ask myself, what are the things that the data tells me? And once I know kind of that answer to the question, now I can say, well, what's not in the data? Right? And now I can start to look at, hey, what is the simulation or that I might run that might be able to help me answer that question, right? What is the war game I could play to sort of tease out what is that insight that I'm missing, right? And so now, and then on the backside of that, we've learned something. And then we go back to the data and see, hey, what have we learned, and can I get more out of the data? What data am I missing? Do I need to go get before I start this cycle all over again?
Jump on that one real quick, sir. So one of the other big issues, we love talking about data. One of the things that isn't addressed enough across the M&S pillars and the wargaming domain, I'm sure you're going to start seeing this real soon with simulation support of war games, is what are the algorithms? So the data is one thing, but you need to understand how that data is going to be used in context in order to understand whether you've selected the right data or whether the algorithm, the way that it's being represented, is appropriate for your intended use. And that's another big hurdle that we're facing across those pillars, is we have a lot of simulation capabilities, not just the Marine Corps, but the DoD, where we do not have a good understanding of what exactly is in those algorithms. They are very old applications, very old simulations, or they're very new ones that are locked down behind walls of proprietary data that we need to get after breaking those down, whether it's through the hard work of going through and building conceptual models for systems we've had for a long time, or demanding that vendors are actually providing those conceptual models for the new simulations that we're getting.
And how do we relate that now to the audience here? Yeah, how do you take what you just talked about there and turn that into developing our logistics personnel or developing folks who aren't logistics professionals just to understand logistics a little bit more?
Well, I can jump into the constructive simulation side because that feeds very well into it. One of the types of capabilities that we provide for training for logisticians and otherwise for everyone is your constructive training simulations. MAGTF Tactical Warfare Simulation is the Marine Corps' contribution to the Joint Force. You have many others that are available to us in the form of the Joint Live Virtual Constructive Federation, JSAF for the Navy, JCATS is a Joint Force Ground Combat Simulation, AWSIM and AFSIM are Air Force constructive simulations. So each one of those provides a different perspective from what force is providing, what service is providing it to you. Now, JDLM, Joint Deployment Logistics Module, I know Mark Hitchcock is in here someplace. So JDLM provides the Joint Force a very robust logistics simulation. That's great, but it is extremely tedious to actually leverage that capability. So you need to build the expertise to, first off, model what you need to have modeled in that simulation, and then be able to leverage it appropriately in context. So if you don't know, for one thing, what the process is that you should be representing, you can't start. If you don't know how to represent it appropriately using the simulation, you can't start. You need both of those pieces of information to then feed into how you can start leveraging these very robust tools that we have to provide the training environment that's needed to train individuals and staffs. When I was at McLaug, that was work that we did using JDLM, coupling it with MTWAs, and that's how we started to bring in the patient evacuation team, bringing them in with the DASC and the HISI so that we could actually start getting after representation of casualty treatment and throughput. How are we going to provide that Class 8? How are we going to account for the bed space availability? Historically, that had not been done during our large-scale exercises. We started leveraging JDLM as a tool to help with tracking all of that to make sure we're appropriately representing the decrementation of that Class 8 and its resupply. So that's going to take a lot of work to actually scale that. That's one of the things we're working on getting after. But when we're talking about having conceptual models that show you what is and is not represented by the simulation, that's an example of what we're talking about, sir.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Pedro.
I could maybe give some actionable things for the folks that are out there. So how many people use some sort of logistics system that has a way to export the data in their job?
We're doing analog here. You don't need to.
Yeah, right. So like, I mean, you asked like, how do we start to get the force ready, right? Like how many of you, of the people that raise their hand, how many of you have actually exported that data and just looked at it in a visual way to see if you could learn some things out of it? Yeah, so less people, right? So if you haven't done that, let's start there, right? And I really do think that that's a powerful tool, right? I'll tell you that for me, I made this mistake of not visualizing my data on a big problem when I was doing my dissertation research. And right before I was about to submit for publication, I did visualize an aspect of the data that I hadn't looked at before, and it told me something completely different than what I expected, right? And so I think having an understanding of the data that you work with day in and day out, and an understanding of what you don't understand about the data that you work with day in and day out, like that is a useful exercise no matter where you are, no matter what your occupational field.
Kurt, I'm going to switch this a little bit to talk about war games. So one of the challenges that we have with war games, and I'm pretty sure it's everywhere, is you almost get almost a myopic focus on a particular function. So function being, okay, we're going to talk about fires and maneuver, or we're going to talk about the kill chain or the kill web of ISR to fires. And those war games are really exciting to many. Yet at the same time, then we'll do a logistics war game to the side. Right. So what are your thoughts on, like, what do we need to do to collide those a little bit more, to have more integrated war games so you're not just tackling one warfighting function?
I think you have to start with the purpose of your experimentation almost from a campaign perspective, right? So the example is similar to the one I had this morning with Army Futures Command, when they, 3 years ago, decided to move from a particular type of wargaming to a different type of wargaming because they felt, to your point, that their ongoing series did not scale up well. So when you tried to take a kill web of the individual components and you say that works, what does that look for a theater fires command, and where between those level of echelons are my potential points of missed connectivity, missed synchronization, lines of authorities and command? Help me understand how to scale up to like that level. And you could almost get too broad, right? The concept becomes the answer to every problem you can say. So it took you from the very tactical, a few things doing a single thing, to the whole theater. And we'll just say, if you don't have a plan over 5 to 8 years, kind of nested in your modernization and acquisition timeline, and you don't take it in bite-sized chunks, get some command priorities on what functions are we going to experiment with first, because we think they're foundational to forming the other functions, warfighting functions. I might have a problem with my methodology, right? It could be a sequencing problem. It could be I misprioritized a particular function, enabling function that I needed first that I put in fifth. The other thing we found was even if say our 3 objectives for functional experimentation for a physical year, even if there were functions that weren't in that year's priorities, when we got into the campaign and game design, we found out, well, you still got to talk about the other functions, right? It's all symbiotic. How do you do that without impacting the focus and the data collection, most importantly, right, of the experiment? So not talking the game now, the broader experiment. And sort of to your point, and when you're not using digital tools that have functionality, that give you reports, that give you visualization, you really go back like 20 years on data collection where I've got rapporteurs and racketeers or data analysts sitting there with their sheets trying to understand a war game and player decisions. And great point you made, Sir, on what's behind the algorithm, right? So what's in the game design that causes a particular behavior may be contextually required to understand what you're seeing. So we said this is probably, if you're trying to write an Army warfighting concept for the service to guide its thinking and then its .mil PF acquisition and modernization for the next 15 to 17 years, we probably need to use more than one tool at a time. So it wasn't games or mods or sims, it was how quickly can we integrate mods and sims into the gaming to better inform and understand the data, because the gameplay should generate the data, right? So the outcome should be the things you're interested in. And so that was very difficult. As I pointed out this morning, we were working with coin-based models while talking about large-scale combat operations. And what you find out is institutionally, if you don't do an analysis up front in your campaign planning for experimentation, you may not identify your starting conditions very well, which impacts your facts and assumptions. All that to say, flexibility and adaptability are the watchwords, because you know your plan isn't going to survive LD, right? It's just not. And how do you adapt that? And what we've learned is inside our modernization organizations, there's lots of individual experiments going on that aren't informing other experiments. There's lots of very useful, interesting data that no one is acting on because we collect it, we don't have a common repository for sharing, and experiments aren't designed to inform other experiments if the command lines and the authorities don't line up so that they naturally talk to each other, right? So then we go to the Big Ten approach. Well, we'll develop a community of practice and let in thousands. I'm back to my original problem. I've scaled up so large, I don't know where to start. So long-winded answer to your question, but that was watching institutional level learning and adapting inside their Title X responsibility. That should be encouraging to everybody. It may not be at a rate that you think is necessary for what you think your current problem is, but if you have a long-term campaign plan of experimentation to arrive at a common end state, you can see it over time. And that's the bigger challenge, is if you build a community of practice, how do you stabilize the organizations and then the people in those to continue to contribute? It's hard every 3 years to change out a piece of that, and you feel like you're taking that organization back to the beginning. Another institutional challenge that gets into the training, but you can see that command beginning to think along those lines and trying to figure out how they would change their own force structure to better implement their responsibility, right? And that, I was talking to a gentleman this morning, that institutional level change is incredibly difficult because you don't always control the conditions for change. So I'm going to stop there. I'm talking too long, but that was, you can't take a single thing and take it out of the whole and make it do something for the whole by itself. It's like, you know, the old analogy, I have a hammer so everything's a nail. You'll get a lot done. I don't know how much of it's useful.
Yeah. And certainly that's kind of taking it from the enterprise perspective and over a long duration. Most folks in here particularly those in uniform, are in your job for about a 2 or 3 year span. And here we're talking about kind of a longer term. So from the perspective of the panel, I think the question now then is, okay, so I'm sitting here and I'm now representing a unit within the Fleet Marine Force. So, yeah, so how can I best utilize war games and mods and sims and the data today to help me develop individually as well as even developing my unit? So, and sometimes it may just be something simple. So I'll just a riff for just a second. So there's, because each one of us likes to talk about different books then too, and really simple book that's out there, and or really simple story here then too. So Moving Mountains by General Gus Pagonis. And there's one tiny vignette that I want to pull out of this. So in there, so here's this, if you don't know the context of this, here's this general that's basically been put in charge of the forced closure in Saudi Arabia before pushing up for Desert Storm, Desert Shield. And it was not with a team. Well, he built a team, but it was okay, you are going as an individual and we will send folks for you to pull together as a team. And on one particular day, he's just walking out onto one of the piers and pulls everybody together, and everybody's expecting another discussion and like accolades from a general officer. We just like to get back to work. But really what he did was, okay, so yeah, I really want to appreciate you guys coming over, and what you guys are doing is enormous. So I'm going to do something strange. So what's like the most important thing on this pier that keeps stuff going? And every single person swung back and pointed at that crane. And he said, so what happens when that crane stops working? And it was just a brainstorm for them to start thinking through the what ifs. And then it pulled the team together and talked about it. And then lo and behold, within the next 2 to 3 days, that crane went down. But the simple fact that they talked about it, you raised the bar of everybody who was on that pier that particular day to prepare them for the day of infamy for them, which could have been the worst thing ever. But they had already talked about it, and they had already talked about some of those things. So using that as kind of the vignette. So as we kind of go down the line, and Matt, I'll go to you too first if you just kind of want to start. And this could be broader Project Tripoli. It could be specific to logistics type stuff. But from that lens, from the lens of a person who's in the Fleet Marine Force, how can they use the stuff that's in your head up here to help raise the bar for folks in their units to understand logistics today?
Sure, absolutely. Have probably way too much on this one to talk about, so feel free to hook me if you need to. But so first off, I'll say for Project Tripoli, any Marine out there, we've got a SharePoint site where we're looking to put all of the knowledge out there. Historically, the simulations community knowledge management has been a big problem. You go to your Battle Sim Center, you go to one of the different simulation facilities, and they can tell you what they know from their personal experience. Again, 8825 M&S officers, they rotate out every 2 to 3 years, so there's a big limitation there. You got some civilian personnel. But what we're doing with Project Tripoli is providing all-domain, all-echelon, persistent LVC training capability. What the hell does that mean? So all-domain means we're not leaving logistics out for once, thank God. All-echelon means we're looking at individual small unit all the way up to that MEF staff and integration with the Joint Force. I already talked about the constructive simulations, which are used for the staff level. We've got lots of joint simulations that we're looking to integrate in together as well. We can talk plenty about that. But when you're talking about the individual and the small unit, that's where we have our virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality training capabilities, whether it's simulators or laptops and head-mounted display capabilities. We're investing more in logistics capabilities there, tactical combat casualty care simulation that we're lifting from the Army, and we're making improvements to make sure it can meet the requirement for field medical training battalions. We've got Minesweeper mixed reality training capability that we're going to be getting after here shortly, GFARP virtual reality trainer. So the big thing to keep in mind for these capabilities is, for at least a couple of these, the origin of it came from a schoolhouse saying, we want this capability, we're going after it. And we did not say, no, don't do that. We said, hold up and work with us on this so that we don't make a one-off capability, we make an enterprise capability. So that you're training to that at the schoolhouse, that's awesome. When you leave that schoolhouse, I want you to have access to it. I want that to be hosted on the Marine Common Virtual Platform, which is a varied suite of platforms of tools that are available at every battle simulation center. Will be starting the next quarter when we start fielding them out, so that you can go and you can do sustainment training on there. You can train other Marines and sailors on that same equipment that you learned in the schoolhouse. We're looking to find those efficiencies where we both invest in stuff and create stuff ourselves, like some of those, or we bring it on from the Joint Force where we find an Army sim like TC3 Sim. We find Navy simulations like Visit 3D for familiarization with ships. We find all these different capabilities that exist out there and make them all available to you via Project Tripoli, via your training support center, your battle simulation center, so that you know where to go to as a training officer or Marine to find out all the capabilities that are available to you and how to integrate them in a live virtual constructive training environment. So there's a lot of capability that we are getting after, way too much for me to talk about in one go. For logistics specifically, mentioned a couple of those. We have a virtual reality maintenance trainer that we're going to be pushing out here in the next few months as well. And then again, with JDLM, with our constructive simulations, we're building a capability. We're leveraging those capabilities for enhancing staff training. And the other big thing that we're taking on, last one I'll mention, in conjunction and coordination with the Joint Staff J7, is starting to bring in more of your operational logistics information systems into your staff training environment. When I was at McLaug, that was one of the biggest hurdles we kept trying to address, is if you want to actually train logisticians to do their jobs, especially staff, officers, and staff NCOs and Marines, you need to give them their operational information systems. Otherwise, they're looking at some random Excel spreadsheet that doesn't mean anything to them and they can't do their job. So that first step is initialization. You have to make sure you populate it with the same force structure and data that you're putting into the simulations. We've got that to a degree. We have an application they're using at McLaug to facilitate that initialization. We're going to more formally put that into the joint training tool, again, taking on another service or the joint staff's capability and making it a Marine Corps capability. And then the next step we're going to be getting after, starting here in the next couple of months, is using robotic process automation for the dynamic populating of those information systems. So this is where I'll throw out my one request, if I can, to the group. If anyone has a logistics information system that you think we need to be training to more, or that we need to have more exposure to with the Joint Force, so we don't just keep talking about using joint resources, we can actually see them and train to use them, please come up to me, let me know. We are looking for what are those information systems to start stimulating and bringing into our staff training environments.
Great answer. Pedro?
Sure. So conversations to raise the bar. One of my panelists was talking about tools. So I work at the Chief Digital and AI Office at Office of the Secretary of Defense, and one of the platforms that we host is called Advana, which is short for Advancing Analytics. And in there is a host of tools that you can use for data analysis, data visualization. There are AI and ML tools in there. Under the Department of the Navy's Community Space Jupiter, the Marine Corps has an instance called Bolt. That is free to you and available. So maybe the conversation starts with, hey, who's got an Advana account? And maybe the answer is nobody. And so we go get some Advana accounts, like who's logged in? Maybe it's nobody. Maybe we should log in, see what those tools are, what data is available. There's a lot of enterprise data, but there are tools to bring in your own data to do visualization analysis, AI and machine learning. So that's, I think, a good conversation to start raising the bar. And then, finding out who knows what in your organization. Like, does anybody have any experience with data analysis or data visualization? Like, we have some very smart young enlisted Marines. I was out at the software factory about a week ago, and just blown away by the work that some of our junior enlisted Marines are doing. And so, and junior officers for that matter too, because I think, a lot of these skills are working themselves into every curricula at the undergraduate level, into high school. And so I think you might be surprised by having that conversation like, hey, does anybody know anything about this stuff? And then I'll tell you, a great resource for me is when I don't know something about a particular, YouTube is great, right? Like when I was learning all these things for the first time, we didn't have as many YouTube resources as there are now. There are a lot of people talking about these things, giving demos, and I think that would be a great start. And then I really think, the talent management discussion, I think it is, we were having it earlier, I like to say, or to joke, I guess, that talent management is the tooth fairy, right? Like my kids think that the tooth fairy puts $1 under their pillow. I think Marines think that there's somebody out there doing their talent management. It's you, right? Like you are responsible for managing your talent. Find those Marines, and it's not easy. I will tell you that. Like we have 2 billets at CDAO, and the Marine Corps selected one of our finest artillery officers with a BA in history to fill one of those billets. I saw that on the slate, and I promptly started making phone calls and emails, and it took me several months to convince the Marine Corps to not do that. I got a 1702 who had a background using large language models in support of cybersecurity. That Marine is now at CDAO as of a month ago. But it's because I had to go and manage the talent for the Marine Corps. You are all talent managers. Have that discussion. We will raise the bar.
Thanks, Pedro. And then Kurt, I want to finish off with war games.
Well, I think to Matt's earlier point, what's available at home station?
Yeah.
How's it being managed? We, see challenges in either some systems don't get used hardly at all. Other systems are in demand well outside the training cycle. So there's a tension there, and how do you keep visibility on what's available? And then when do you start looking for off-the-shelf types of tools to train individuals, to train staffs? I call it low entry, low overhead, low cost options, so that at the unit level, when you're doing your, what euphemistically is called like your day job, you can still try to look for other tools to bring into your plan and offset some of that tension in your unit environment. The key is obviously to have a plan, and then to your point, sir, the talent management, who in your unit's got that particular skill and passion to do that for you? It might be outside of traditionally where you find it in like your 3 shop for training, right? That's okay. If we're going to expect our Marines to adapt rapidly in large-scale combat operations against a peer threat, may not follow traditional staff roles and responsibilities or unit task organization.
Yeah, I'll go one step further. Even when you start realizing the education that a lot of our senior enlisted and even some of the junior enlisted have, you might find that here's somebody who really understands war games. Here's somebody who really understands LLM within any rank, and then you might just be pulling them aside to help kind of coach that stuff along. So I think we have some. Did you have one more, Matt? 'Cause I want to open for a few questions.
So just real quick on the wargaming side,
Yeah.
the experimentation side. So that question came up a lot at the last ITSIC, the big simulations conference, packed room, Marine Corps panel talking about wargaming. Everyone wanted to know what are the war games that they have available, how can they get their hands on them. And we had representation from MCU, Marine Corps University for wargaming, of course, McWill, Wargaming Division. And so one of the things we're trying to do is start consolidate that information so that it isn't just this, there's war games out there, figure it out, find people, but have, in conjunction with using your people, have some resource that says, these are the different ways to use war games, use them for experimentation, use them for education, familiarization with different concepts. And here are specific examples, here are specific vignettes and artifacts to get you off the ground, to get you running. And so that's what's, if you go talk to your battle simulation centers, you've got your M&S officers there. Soon, it's expected, McWill is going to start putting out virtualized stand-in force, which is virtualized representation of some C2 systems. That's for experimentation, but there's an expectation that they're going to start getting into more of that support for wargaming support as well at some point. That won't be terribly soon, but Marine Corps University for the first time this summer is getting 8825 modeling simulation officer to specifically to support MCU's use of simulations to support war games. So if you have questions about that, Captain Tidwell, look him up at MCU or reach out to myself. Happy to start helping to build that body of knowledge, post it again on our Tripoli SharePoint as a KM site to help get after this and make it so that we're not asking these same questions over and over again on what are the different war games we have available and what's the right use for them.
Yeah, and war games is a wide because in some cases you almost get caught, particularly in this discussion, even then too, between the last discussion and this one, thinking war game is this digital thing. It could be a board game. It could almost just be almost a TTX style, just discussion around the room, again, to raise the bar. And for what it's worth, the reason why I'm saying raise the bar is if you are interested, there's one particular book that had been pushed around Marine Corps University several years ago called Raising the Bar, which is about using tactical decision games to get folks to understand more about their profession and other professions, to get them to realize that there's a whole lot more that's out there. So how are we? Do we have time for a few questions? Okay, yeah, so we got time for a few questions if anybody had any questions. Yes, sir.
First of all, I want to thank you. Really interesting to talk about the data and analytics piece of it. I'm a former MU4, and one of the challenges I ran into was, the data and analytics of, let's say, improper maintenance, of it going to the right person to actually basically take action. So it was almost like, I like the way the thought process in the conference is almost like treating the data like a piece of gear. And that last tactical mile, if data in this case doesn't go to the right person, I mean, we know what can happen. I mean, we know about the group here knows about the AV tragedy. And I can tell you, I've worked with that crew before. And if it's not handled and those people aren't educated, then ultimately it can have those type of effects. So I guess what I'm asking the group really is the question is, are we ensuring the data gets to the right people to take the appropriate action? Thank you.
Thoughts?
So I don't know about how logistics data flows. I'm a communications officer, but I do like the way that you phrased data as a piece of gear, right? Because in your example, you're saying like the data has to go to the right person, just like a piece of gear needs to go to the unit that needs it. And I really would like you to think about, I think we can raise the bar by changing the conversation about data. If you looked at the old DoD data strategy, it would refer to data as a strategic asset. If you look at the most recent one that was released in October of 2023, that phrasing has changed to say, to think of data as a product. And I think there's a specific context there that, a product, an asset has value because you hold on to it. Right, and it gains value, and I cash it in, and I get that value. A product has value when other people use it, right? And so, like, if we start to think of the data that we generate as a product that must be consumed, right? Like, now I can start to treat it like gear, where it's something that is useful to me, right? And so, like, when we have exercises, what products are coming out of there, and then are they being used, right? So, like, I don't want to just generate data products because I aggregated some things, I curated them, and I want to pat myself on the back. I did a good job at that, right? Like, I'll tell you, I have a story that I heard recently where a team, $15 million to create 3 data products, no metrics on how many people are using them. I because of that no answer back, I assume that number is very low. And I will take a terrible data product that everybody uses because they know how to get insights from it, but that requires a change of mindset. Products have value because other people use them. Data needs to be treated like a product.
I very much liked the question from Master Sergeant earlier about standardizing use of logistics information systems. I got it, mandating. Sure, we're not going to mandate, but we need to standardize. We need to give some sort of guidance on how we leverage our information systems, because otherwise what we've seen at McLaug over the years is even when you do mandate that units come and use their go-to-war log C2 system, the vast majority don't know how to turn it on. They don't know how to use it in context. They might have gone and got their class on how to operate the buttonology, but those FSRs, they don't know how to implement it in context. No one is providing the guidance or direction, either one, on how to implement our log C2 systems in context. It is left up to the MEFs, where they do not have the time to go through that myriad of log C2 systems and start figuring out how best to use all these different things because they have a day job they're trying to get done. So we have completely glossed over this, aside from where it is a garrison function. And that leads to a very dangerous world where logisticians confuse their garrison responsibilities with their warfighting responsibilities. And so when we start looking at what are our log C2 systems and making sure that the right data is going to the right place, we need to make sure that we are very clear on that separation between what am I using in garrison and what am I training to use for warfighting.
One thing I will say, just as another tool in the toolkit then too, so when you think of the rehearsals and rehearsals of concepts, so oftentimes folks will actually use a rehearsal to think again through that kind of kill chain of ISR to the actual weapon system that's going to fire this missile or this rocket. I have seen some units that are actually kind of playing that same thing from the viewpoint of, okay, so here's a unit that does have a request, so how is that communicated? And some of that is even just to test out what type of duplicative communications networks we have then too. So just a different way to look at that. So, I'll kind of, oh, yeah, one more question in the back. Yeah, go ahead.
Gotcha. Better. I don't mean to poo-poo wargaming, but there's a lot of like these AOs we're potentially going to be operating in. There's a lot that we don't know, and it's inevitably contrived, right? When we set up these scenarios, and I would say being naive is a huge core competency, and that there's we might send someone, or we might think there's an SOP or way to handle something. We put people in a room. And we say, hey, how are we going to get these supplies from point A to point B? And they're going to say, well, there's this new solid state rocket with, that can loiter in low Earth orbit, and it can deliver MREs and an IFAC to a MARSOC unit. And like, well, that sounds fancy. But if we, send these folks over to Manila, for example, and say, hey, look, no one's coming. How are you going to get supplies from point A to point B with no large operational footprint? And teaching the fact that cultural empathy, cultural awareness, that a lot of the capacity exists in situ, and maybe understanding who the head of the local fisheries co-op and the entrepreneur who runs the last mile or like the hyper local food distribution network are really, really important elements to this. And is there a world where we can start sending folks overseas under the guise of a war game where it's less tech, large language modeling, and saying, we need to learn to adapt to areas we are not going to be able to resupply and support potentially. Do we have the ability to, rapidly understand, hopefully ahead of time, what in situ networks exist and capabilities exist?
So is your question more about war games or pushing folks forward just to gain that appreciation, just so I know the question?
Is there a world where we can use the construct of a war game, and as opposed to having it very contrived and controlled, can we start sending folks abroad for a new way of education?
Yeah, so in some cases, and recognizing the time then too, so, and just some different things that we have seen and we know folks are doing. So certainly, in some cases, exercises when units are going overseas, whether it's a MU exercise or exercise in the Philippines or exercise in Norway, we're still able to learn from that, although in some cases, there's actually less learning because you're in a MAGTF bubble and somebody else. But somebody on the outskirts of that bubble is actually tapping into theater logistics. So this is not the question you're asking directly, but an interesting thing that we're doing right now then too, and I can actually even point to Mr. Jay Lin, who's in here then too. So we recently had some folks work with the Filipino government on one of the particular islands in the Philippines, just to do kind of I'll say a war game kind of facilitated discussion to better understand the resiliency of their power grid and some of the utilities that are there. The simple fact that we're there also allows us to better understand that environment a little bit better and to develop relationships. And I'm certainly probably very much oversimplifying what Jay did on this, but there are other opportunities that are out there, and some of it just comes down to the ingenuity. And then still there's a dollar to that then too. So, but particularly if you're going, like in this case, it was to support the Filipino government too. So there's a lot that can be learned from that too. So, but the bigger point to this is it's just the ingenuity, and that's really, so again, we're here talking about just a few pieces, war games and Project Tripoli and mods and sims and how to use data. And a lot of this just comes down to your own ingenuity about how to develop your own understanding as well as the understanding of the individuals around you and the organizations that you're in. So I'll give you one last other vignette, which is kind of like, so after spending a lot of time in 29 Palms, it's interesting. We have so many units that go to 29 Palms for what we call the integrated training exercise for those of you who are not Marines. And a unit will come from anywhere in the globe, and they'll come there and they'll do about a month long of training. And it comes up randomly in side discussions of, yeah, no, it would be great if somebody really So we know that this is about tactical training, but it'd be great if we could get more training about the force closure piece to better understand that. And it's the discussion, like, okay, hold on a second. So your unit's not from 29 Palms, so you came from someplace, and you've probably phased your group in different groups, and you sent a group early as kind of an advanced party to collect equipment out of buildings, which would be similar to pulling stuff off of a ship or out of the cave someplace. And you put that together and you did RSO and I, and you collected everybody, and then you went to war. So yeah, that is actually training. So the point here is use every single day real life programs, real life systems. It's okay, how do you use every single day to learn? And we are actually all doing that. But as leaders, every once in a while, you need to actually stop and just, okay, hold on. So let's debrief what we just did today. Well, what do you mean? Well, let's debrief what we just did today, because there's probably a whole lot more learning in just that day than we may have just realized, because we just lived through it as if it's just another day. So sorry about the pontification. So what I will end with, so MCDP4 update came out last year. There's a whole lot that's in here that's actually kind of talking about kind of 21st century logistics then too. The other one that came out last year was Installations and Logistics 2030. General Poole then talked about what the next phase from that was, and from INL, kind of an answer to Installations and Logistics 2030 was the Installations and Logistics Campaign Plan. I'm not just throwing these up for just eye candy. My point to this is in all three, well, actually, so in those two documents, INL 2030, as well as the INL Campaign Plan, and Sustaining the Force for the 21st Century as an update 2.0, every single one of those actually has a specific line of effort that is all about creating and building a 21st century logistician. So we only just touched on a few things here, and really appreciate your time with that. But yeah, each one of you, the ask of you is, okay, so yeah, what can you do for your Marines? And then for what it's worth, what can you do to help us make that a repeatable thing through war games and through mods and sims, and then through the data that we have. So really appreciate your time. And then I don't think I'm giving back any time, but I give back time to the Master of Ceremonies.
Everybody give him a round of applause.